This is the second video in our 6 Network Packet Tracer Lab series, and in this video we'll be configuring our 3 switches and attaching our 6 end user PCs for testing VLAN 1 and 10. So the first thing we're going to do is attach the cables to our end user PCs on switch 1. We go fast Ethernet 1 and fast Ethernet 10 for VLANs 1 and 10. We're going to open up switch 1, CLI, enable conf-t global config mode, and we're going to give it the host name of SIS1 subinterface switch 1. Now we're going to name our VLANs. We're using VLAN 1 and it's used in default. If we were to configure other VLANs as the native VLANs, we would get conflicts and errors until the final configuration. We're not going to bother about that because we're just in the learning process. So we're just going to go to VLAN 10 and give it the name design. VLAN 20, going to give it the name marketing, and VLAN 30, we're going to give it the name of networking. Now we can X out of that with a CTRL and Z, do a show VLAN command, and you can see our 4 VLANs ready and named for further configuration. Now the next thing we're going to do is to configure our gigabit interface 02, this one here. So we're going to go back into global config mode, int G02, switch port mode trunk, as these will be handling our 4 VLANs and carry them to our default gateway out of the network at SIR1 subinterface router 1. Switch port trunk allowed, VLAN 1, 10, 20, 30. And that's our first gigabit interface configured. The next one we're going to do is gigabit interface 01. Just going to use the up arrows on our PC. Change that to 1. And that's our second gigabit interface configured. Now we're just going to go through and give our default VLAN an IP address. So it's int VLAN 1. IP address 200.168.1.11 because this is the first switch on our network. 255.255.255.0. On a small to medium sized network, I like to name my routers or give them the IP address 1 to 10, and then the switches I'll give them addresses from 11 to 20. Servers would be 21 to 30. Peripherals such as scanners and printers would be 31 to 40, and then end user PCs would be 41 up. It's just a simple way of addressing if you're doing a small network. So we're just going to go IP default hyphen gateway 200.168.1.1 from video 1. Last thing to do is to configure our 2 fast Ethernet ports. So it's int f 01, switch port mode access, switch port access VLAN 1, and we're going to just change that with our up arrows on our PC to do fast Ethernet 10. And that's our first switch configured. So we're just going to exit out of that, copy run start, and we're just going to connect the other user PCs to switch 2, same again, fast Ethernet 1, fast Ethernet 10, because we'll just be testing VLANs 1 and 10. CLI, enable conf T, host SI S2, subinterface switch 2, name our VLANs, VLAN 10 was design, VLAN 20 was marketing, VLAN 30 was networking, exit out of that, back to standard global config mode, configure our gigabit interface, gigabit 01, switch port mode trunk, switch port trunk allowed VLAN 1, 10, 20 and 30. Just going to do that with the next gigabit interface, this one here, gigabit 02. Using the up arrows on our PC. Then we're going to give our VLAN 1 the IP address. (200.168.1.12). This is now our second switch. 255.255.255.0. Our IP default gateway. (200.168.1.1) and our final Ethernet ports. Node access, switch port access VLAN 1, mirror that for fast Ethernet 10, and that's switch 2 completed. Save our configuration. And straight onto switch 3. Bus Ethernets 1 and 10. The global config mode. Host SI S3, subinterface switch 3. Name our VLANs. Now we're just not going to just blast through this, because I know that some of you will have a dual monitor system and have this video open on one monitor and your own packet tracer open on another, so you can just follow along. So it's VLAN 30, and that was name networking. Exit that to standard global config mode. We configure our gigabit interfaces. The first one I'm going to do is gigabit 01, this one here, run into switch 2. Switch port mode trunk. Allowed VLAN 1. Do the same with the next gigabit interface 02, running up to subinterface router 2. Give the IP VLAN 1 an IP address. (200.168.1.13) 255.255.255.0. IP default gateway 200.168.1.1. And our final two Ethernet ports. Switch port mode access. Switch port access. VLAN 1. And just use the up arrows just to configure our final fast Ethernet port. Just do a copy run start. That's our 3 switches configured. Now we're just going to go ahead and give IPs to our 6 PCs. Just going to do a 200.168.1.50. Copy that. That's our VLAN 1. Next PC. And the VLAN 10, so we name it 1050. Now we're just going to do the IP default gateway as 200.168.10.1, and I'll explain the IP address in a minute. We're just going to name this PC. There's certain commands we can't enter in Packet Tracer, and unfortunately this is one of them. .100. Double check our IPs. Course of 1. And our final IP address. And our final default gateway right, we're just going to get the IP from here, 200.168.101. Go to the command prompt, ping. Get a reply, and then we're getting a reply on VLAN 1. And get the address. Oh, this should be 10. 100 for VLAN 10. And there you go, instant replies on VLAN 10. Now, as you've noticed, I'm sure you have, that these are now on a different default gateway to what we've been entering, 200.168.10.1. Now, in a real world scenario of a hardware lab, we could go to our switches and we'd go into global config mode and we'd give them an IP route of 0000 space 0000, and then we'd go 200.168.1.1. Now that basically takes any IP address through to our default gateway of 200.168.1.1, but if we do that, you see we get an invalid input detected because switches in Packet Tracer do not allow that command. But in a real world scenario with proper hardware, that's how you would get around the VLANs of the default gateway of 200.168.10.1 and the VLAN of 200.168.10.100 on our VLAN 10. And that completes our second video. If you have any comments or questions about what I've just said or this whole video, please leave them below and I'll try and answer as many as I can. This is Roger's Classes and I'm Roger at CCNA Solutions.